Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens.
Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving podcast. My name is Ashley, and today we have a very special episode for you, which is our Best of Experts edition. The 2022 season is ending, and we wanted to present to you a Best of 2022 series from all of our favorite guests throughout the year. We will break these down into 2 episodes. The first episode will be featuring some of the plant-based experts that have bestowed their wisdom upon us, which we are so grateful for. And if you are new to Plant-Centered and Thriving, this episode will be an amazing place to start to get just a sense of all the best little nuggets of information that we've covered over this past year from our experts. Stay tuned next week when we present part 2. This will feature some of our favorite inspirational stories from guests that have used the power of plants to change their lives. We are so grateful to all of you who have followed us throughout this year. We do this all for you, and we are incredibly grateful for you. Please enjoy part 1 of our Best of 2022 series.
Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. You may know him as Dr. B or the Gut Health MD on Instagram. Dr. B is an award-winning gastroenterologist, internationally recognized gut health expert, and the New York Times best-selling author of Fiber Fueled and the Fiber Fueled Cookbook, which just came out. So Dr. B, I'm curious if you could summarize just a few pillars of how to create a healthy gut or some things that you've mentioned in your book, which we'll talk about here at the end too.
Okay. Number 1, I've already mentioned fermented foods.
Yep.
That's the first pillar. Number 2, recognize the power that exists in dietary fiber. If I walk out in the street, 19 out of 20 people in the United States are completely inadequate in their fiber consumption. And they're asking, where do I get my protein from? And they're way over the top in terms of the amount of protein that their body needs, but they're wildly inadequate in their fiber. They need to start asking, where am I going to get my fiber from? And the reason why is because in my favorite fiber trial of all time, this was a systematic review and meta-analysis, Andrew Reynolds, The Lancet, 2019. Dietary fiber, when we consume more of it, you are less likely to have a heart attack, less likely to die of heart disease, less likely to have 3 types of cancer, less likely to die of cancer, less likely to have a stroke, less likely to be diagnosed with diabetes. These are 4 of the top 10 causes of death in the United States. We could be addressing our public health issues by simply consuming the appropriate amount of fiber. And the reason why it works is because fiber is prebiotic. It is fuel for your microbiome. And when it contacts your microbes, they produce short-chain fatty acids, which are the most healing, most anti-inflammatory compounds I've ever come across in my 20 years of study in medicine. We need fiber. That's number 2.
And I'm assuming you're not talking about like a fiber bar or like a powder fiber.
So there can be benefit to prebiotic fiber supplements, but it should never be that we're trying to supplement our way out of a bad diet. It should be that we are changing our diet to include more dietary fiber, and there may still be a role for some prebiotic fiber supplements.
Okay.
Number 3, it's not just grams of fiber, as you just mentioned, Ashley. It's not just grams of fiber. It's varieties of plants. Every single plant has fiber. You don't have to ask me where the fiber is. It's in the plants. It's easy. Every single plant has fiber, and every single plant is going to feed specific families of microbes. It's hard to imagine because they're invisible to our naked eye, but they're alive. And they're much like us. They are picky eaters. So they don't all like kale. We need variety because when we eat a variety of plants, we are feeding all of them. So perhaps the most important of the 4 pillars, focus on variety in your diet. This is applicable to everyone. I don't care what diet you eat. It could be any diet. I'm glad you're here. And eat more variety in your diet. Abundance, not restriction. I should just add real quick, this is not just, by the way, a Dr. B-ism or idea. This is actually clinically validated. The largest study to date combining diet and lifestyle with the health of our gut microbiome found that the single most powerful predictor of a healthy gut microbiome was the variety, the diversity of plants in our diet. In that study, the healthiest people were eating at least 30 varieties of plants per week.
Okay, 30 per week. That's good to know.
30 per week.
Yep.
All right. And then number 4, I think it's worth saying this. It's so easy for me, and I'm very guilty of this, and I've just proven it based upon our show so far to date. It's so easy for me to just focus on nutrition the whole time and pretend that the only thing that matters is the food that goes in your mouth. But you can heal your gut without lifting a fork. Lifestyle. Don't lose sight of the importance of well-rested sleep and movement, like staying physically active. This is not just an in the gym thing. Taking a walk in your neighborhood is amazingly good for you. And stress, reducing stress, dealing with things that are unsettled in our life, and circadian rhythm. So it's kind of sleep, but it's kind of not. Because the thing is, you could get 8 hours of sleep, but playing on your tablet or phone or laptop or in front of your television from 8 o'clock until 11 o'clock at night is disrupting your sleep hormones. And you may sleep for 8 hours, but it is not well rested 8 hours of sleep. So it's important for us to be cautious about like engaging with technology late in the evening. It's a better time for us to be unwinding and reading a book.
Today, I have Trudy Stone with me, and she educates people about nutrition solutions for managing stress and anxiety. From healthy habits to brain health, Trudy is passionate about empowering people to build healthier habits and unlock the power of plant-based foods to build a strong and vibrant brain and body. Trudy is also the creator of the RISE method, a step-by-step framework to help people like myself and like you overcome stress, overwhelm, and fatigue.
When we look at stress and the way that it damages our body, it actually can damage our body in irreversible ways. There's at least 17 different conditions that we can link to excess stress. Problems with memory. Okay, so it can actually attack the part of your brain called the hippocampus that's responsible for memory and learning. So if you're finding yourself really stressed out, maybe your memory is impacted, right? Maybe you just feel like you just can't focus. Your blood sugar as well. Your blood sugar also can go on the rise during stressful situations with hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, which are the stress hormones, right? So I like to, kind of frame that up first and have people understand like, hey, there are certain conditions and illnesses that can actually be linked to excess stress. So we really do need to find a way to channel that stress.
I think that's an important thing to touch on too, is that, we can eat, in quotes, the healthiest possible diet ever, but if we're not managing our stress at the same time, I mean, sometimes it doesn't matter what you do, because you're right. Like stress can create so many diseases. It can turn into so many, different debilitating things. And I think that's just a really important thing to touch on as well.
Yeah. And you're right, Ashley. Really mindset is at the ground floor when it comes to making any sort of changes in your life, whether it is, managing stress, whether it is eating more plants, right? Whatever it is, it all comes down to mindset. That is the ground floor. That is the foundation that you build off of. And that's why the first step in the RISE method is for ruminating. So the R stands for ruminating. And if you've ever heard of ruminating before, that's when you tend to dwell on situations that you find distressing or upsetting, or when you replay a problem over and over again in your mind. And I'm sure a lot of us have done that. Like it could be, maybe you had a discussion with your coworker that didn't go as well as you thought it would go. So now you're replaying that again and again in your mind. Like maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe when I said that, this person thought this thing. But when you do that, you train your emotional brain. And I also like to call this your inner mean girl. So you train that emotional part of your brain to become even more powerful, which makes it more likely that you're going to spend even more time in the future being stressed and feeling anxious and ruminating. So what I say is, let that energy of stress be the thing that drives you towards where it is you want to go. Okay. Don't use that energy to worry about all of the things that you don't want, because then you're just going to go deeper and deeper into a hole. And that emotional part of your brain is actually going to be trained to become stronger. We've all heard of the pothole analogy. Like when we focus on the pothole in the road, we go right there, right? It's the same thing when it comes to rumination and when it comes to training our brain. Right. So we need to redirect that stress, turn it into a superpower and, use it to point, the ship of your life in the direction that you want to go. And the reason why this is also important, I talked about illnesses earlier, but we have over 30 trillion different cells in our body, Ashley, and each one of those cells are influenced by our thoughts. So every thought you think, that influences chemical messengers in your brain and how your body ultimately functions. So your thoughts really are a part of your illness as well as your wellness.
Wow. So if, let's say, like I am having a conversation, with myself, I'm in the bathroom and like I'm getting ready to go to bed or whatever, and I'm kind of replaying these thoughts over and over again, this conversation that I had with a coworker, you had kind of said redirecting your thoughts is really helpful to kind of basically turn that into basically fuel your fire in a different direction. So what would you recommend kind of specifically there? Because I know a lot of people can relate to playing a conversation over and over in their head or kind of battling back and forth with, someone in their brain. So what would you recommend if someone is doing that?
Yeah, great question, Ashley. Ultimately, when you have these negative thoughts, your brain is just really just doing its job, which is to protect you. It thinks it's protecting you when it has these negative thoughts, right? So a quick tip is to just stop in the moment if you can. If you're driving, then don't do that. But, to stop in the moment where you can and practice catch, release, and replace. Okay. So this involves taking a few deep breaths. So on that first breath in, you want to catch that thought, whatever that thought is that you have, whatever that thing that's stressing you out or making you feel overwhelmed, and just say to yourself, that's an interesting thought. Okay. Then when you exhale, I want you to thank your brain for trying to protect you. Because again, that's all it's trying to do, is just trying to protect you. Okay. So it's not that we want to completely try to eliminate these thoughts. Just picture almost like, a cloud just floating in the sky. The cloud doesn't stay still in the sky. Clouds are always going to be there, but they pass, right? So you want to think about that thought, just kind of like a cloud passing in the sky. Okay. And then on your next breath, replace that thought with something that is more helpful. Okay. Something that you feel is more empowering.
Today, I have Dr. Yami on the show, and we talk about a parent's guide to intuitive eating. And you actually know one thing that we ended up discussing was how to merge intuitive eating and plant-based eating or veganism together. But you talk about the 5 pillars of healthy eating in your book, which I like how you approach them. I was curious if you could just either touch on a few or touch on all of them, just to kind of give us a little preview of what that looks like.
Yeah. And so I just created this framework just so it's easy for parents to think about it in their heads and what I prioritize when I'm teaching parents in my office and working with clients. So the first one is not what people would expect from me because, I do have Veggie Doctor Radio. So I'm always talking about eating more vegetables. I really think the number one thing that we want to focus on is honoring hunger and satiety. And the reason I wrote it like that is because when we are feeders of children, so we're helping feed them, we want to respect that from them. And that's what I was talking about, that trust, so honoring the fact that they're showing hunger cues. You may have a baby, you may have a toddler, you may have an older child, honoring that, but also honoring the satiety part. Do they turn their head away when they're babies? If they're a toddler, are they ready to get down and play? If it's an older child, are they done with their meal? They want to go off and do other stuff. So we want to trust and we want to honor that hunger and satiety. That's the number one principle, I think, that as parents, even if they did nothing else, would really be so health promoting. Because once we start interfering with that and breaking that down, that's when we start all kinds of other eating habits. And when we force kids to eat that aren't hungry, they actually start to develop food aversions. So we want to support these healthy habits about eating more fruits and vegetables, but the way that we're feeding them is actually making them eat less fruits and vegetables. So a lot of things that parents don't realize about it. So number one, honor hunger and satiety. Close by after that is to emphasize whole plant foods. And, I myself eat a plant-based diet. I'm also vegan. My children have been raised on a plant-based diet and they're vegan as well. So it is safe. Children can thrive on a completely plant-based diet, but I know that not everybody is interested in being vegan or being completely plant-based. However, currently, in the United States, children are deriving 70% of their calories from ultra processed foods and animal products. Okay. So really the majority of what they're eating is not whole plant foods. So any steps we can make towards integrating more whole plant foods into their diets is going to be very health promoting. But this also supports intuitive eating, because we know that when we eat whole foods, when we eat fiber, it's helping us sense our satiety, helping us feel satisfied, giving us the macro and micronutrients that we need. So just working on emphasizing more whole plant foods in their meals and their snacks throughout the day. Doesn't have to be only whole plant foods. It doesn't have to be only plants. But if we can get to predominantly, that would be really great. Number 3 is establishing a positive environment. And I have 2 meanings of this. Number 1 is just going to be a positive environment as far as food. So if we want our kids to eat more whole plant foods, we have to actually purchase them and prepare them and have them in our home. So sometimes we have these ideas, we want to do it, but we don't actually get around to putting it in our house. So we really want to fill our fridge, our pantry, our counters. We want there to be beautiful, colorful, satisfying fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. So working on establishing that. So then when we walk into our kitchen, we walk into our house, it's a vision board for what we want. And I know that your listeners want this. They want that healthy environment. They want thriving kids who are eating lots of whole plant foods. Well, you have to have it in your living vision board. So that's the first part of this pillar. The second part of the positive environment is just like I was referring to earlier. It's going to be our words. It's going to be the images we see, whether it's spoken words or written words. What media are we consuming? What magazines do you have laying around? I know that I used to love subscribing to Weight Watchers magazine and Self and Shape, because I felt like that would inspire me every time I was on a diet to keep with the diet. But these publications are very fat phobic. So it's basically like lose 5 pounds for your bikini and all of these things constantly over and over and over again. So that's putting into our psyche that this is the way that we want to live life. We want to live life constantly dieting, constantly worrying about our body size, fitting into a certain size, looking a certain way. So being conscious of what we're putting into the environment, being conscious of the words you're saying, and creating a positive place. How do you want your kids to feel about their bodies? How do you want them to feel about, how they live their life according to food and their bodies? And that's what you want to put into your environment. Number 4 is to be flexible. I think this is really important, especially for us mamas that are perfectionists and all or nothing thinkers. Like I said, I went through a phase where it was just like, no sugar, no treats, nothing. We will eat rice, brown rice and black beans. It was just like very strict. And that doesn't work very well, especially as kids grow up. So we can probably be that way before they go to school, because they're not going to know a difference. They don't encounter any of those things. But once you release your kiddos out into the world, they're in preschool, they're, elementary school, there's the birthday parties. There's like literally a celebration every single day. Like, I don't even know how many celebrations they have, but there's all kinds of things. Once they know that there's other things out into the world, and you're constantly saying you can never have that, then it really becomes a struggle for some children. And this is also just about how you live your life in general, because we aren't home all the time. We're vacationing, we're traveling. So what I tell people is try to think about it like 80-20. 80% of the time, be as health promoting as you can, make your brown rice and beans, stay with your whole foods, do your stuff that makes you, that makes you feel good, so that you can have 20% wiggle room. And this allows you to relax so that you're not always stressing out. And it also helps your children develop that relationship with food, because kids have to learn on their own their limits too. If we're constantly limiting them and saying, you can never have that, you can never have, this thing, then it makes it difficult for them to practice intuitive eating. Now, I do talk about in my book that every family has to determine for themselves what their rules are. And I know that some people are a lot more strict in their veganism, and it's very, very important to them. And so there's alternatives too. Like, for example, if a birthday party is coming and you really don't want your child to have a cupcake that might have dairy or egg in there, then you have to make time and be deliberate about taking the alternative cupcake or some other alternative treat that might be used in place of that for your child, and having conversations with your children. But at some point, especially as they're older, you may have to let go a little bit and let them explore the world, because like I said before, the more tightly we grip, the more we try to control, usually it creates more problems. And it's hard for mama's hearts. I know that. Believe me, I've been there.
Yeah.
So that's just one of my recommendations, is to employ that 80-20 rule. And then the last one is also helping moms and parents, and that's relax and have fun. Like feeding kids, feeding ourselves. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be stressful. You asked me earlier, what's one of the biggest things that changed after I made the switch and this evolution began? And it's just that mealtime can be so fun. Mealtime can be relaxed. It can be enjoyable. I'm not stressed. There's nobody crying. So, it makes a big difference just in your overall satisfaction with life, to be able to just enjoy it and know that you're not going to be perfect, and don't have expectations that you're going to be perfect. Like sometimes we set out with these expectations that are so unrealistic. We're going to try to eat perfectly, and it's going to be like a super busy week and you didn't even have time to prep and do all those stuff. Just do the best you can. I swear to you that nothing bad is going to happen, especially if you know that the majority of the time you're on track and you're doing well. So those are the 5 pillars.
Kim Rose is a Florida-based registered dietitian nutritionist with a focus on health and wellness concerns for underserved populations. Her inclusive approach and philosophy revolve around making nutrition easy and attainable by addressing common and complex food and wellness topics for the general public and health professionals alike. So, Kim, historically, we thought that sugar was like the number one culprit. Nothing else mattered. If you ate a lot of sugar, if you ate a lot of bread or pasta, you liked fruit, you were sort of like inevitably going to have type 2 diabetes, or if you were diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, that was the reason. And Kim, I worked in nursing homes for like 8 years, and clients were still telling me, oh, I can't have bread, or I can't have pasta that's on the menu because of XYZ, or I can't have fruit. And part of me that made me really sad. But anyways, so tell us kind of what we know now. Obviously it's still part of the maybe concern, but tell us what we know now with how the research has maybe changed around that.
Ooh, you just hit a spot with me.
Oh,
So it's so funny because I realized something when I told you I went to my conference last week. I realized, how everyone talks about generational trauma?
Yes.
There is a generational trauma when it comes to food and nutrition, specifically when we speak about corn, we speak about bread, we speak about potatoes, we speak about fruit. Oh, there's a generational trauma that has been passed down that these foods are bad, when in actuality, there's no such thing as a bad food. All foods can fit into a blood sugar friendly diet. As a matter of fact, I was looking at this research. And this research, and I'll send you the article so that you can put it in the show notes. This research showed that when individuals with type 2 diabetes actually increase their intake of fruits, because I know fruits are demonized as well, of fruits, and then reduce their consumption, I think it was, of more processed foods, that this actually improved their overall blood sugars. So I think that there's a lot of generational trauma that is being passed down, that this food is bad and that food is bad. But in actuality, if you are just aware of how many carbs are in a particular food item, even if it's, hypothetically speaking, white bread, it can fit into your diet. Only thing you have to do, because the white bread is missing fiber, is, hey, have a salad, have some beans, replace that fiber, doctor it up. Because I'll be honest with you, there's like, even last night, after my workout, I wanted a sandwich and I didn't want wheat bread. I wanted white bread on my sandwich with my just egg and my tomato and, my veggie mayo. And what I did, because I realized like, hey, I need more fiber, I made a green smoothie to go with that. So it's really about being conscientious of your sources of fiber. Does this food have fiber in it? Yeah, this food may be starchy, but the fiber definitely does help to slow down the blood sugar spikes. So I really want us to unlearn that generational trauma, because this is how dietitians are labeled as the food police, and how it's still perpetuated in the 20th century, 21st century, to be honest with you. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with foods. You can enjoy the foods that you like.
Yeah, which is good to know, because I think when their doctor's telling them they have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, there's going to be this list of foods that they, quote, can't have or should limit. And a lot of these foods, like you said, are foods that historically have been passed down as, quote, bad, and they should be avoided when you have type 2 diabetes. But what's refreshing to hear from you is that really anything can fit. It's just a matter of sort of being mindful of your choices and being mindful of your fiber intake, and I'm sure a bunch of other different things.
Exactly, exactly. And I think you definitely hit the nail on the head right there by saying, they're giving a list of foods of what not to eat, but no one ever says, what can you eat? Like last night, I got a DM from someone that's saying that, she's out to prove her doctor wrong because the doctor said no white foods. And I'm just thinking all of a sudden, okay, what about like beans? What about like onions and like cauliflower? I even remember one time in the hospital setting, someone said to me, yeah, I don't eat white foods. Trust me, when I eat onions and garlic, my blood sugar spikes. And I'm like, there is no way. But they learned that from their doctor.
Yeah.
So color has nothing to do with how the body is receptive to it. And I mean, these foods as well, when we think about the foods in the plant kingdom, they're there for a reason. They grow naturally. It's not like, you're putting it in a factory and you're grinding it to make something. Like, these foods are naturally grown. They're naturally occurring. They're full of antioxidants for a specific reason, because our body needs them and we need to consume them for optimal health. So,
but Corinne comes on the show and she talks to us about our cycles. And I'm not kidding y'all, my eyes, I was like wide-eyed, my mouth was open, just listening to Corinne speak on a subject that a lot of us don't hear a lot about. Okay, Corinne, I cannot let you go without asking you, because you said earlier on about painful periods, how that really isn't, quote, normal. So can you just touch on that a little bit more? Because I feel like I've always been told, well, it's normal to have cramps and to sit with a heating pad and take a bunch of Midol or ibuprofen and lay on the couch. So.
Yes. Oh my God. Haven't we all? And I've been there. I used to literally have packs of Midol during my period. Like, that's what my life was. But it's not normal. And pain is never normal. Like, we should just know that. Like, any type of pain is really not normal. That means there's something going on. And our period, our menstrual cycle, the whole thing is our vital sign, which means it's letting us know of inner health that's going on, the quality of our health. So a vital sign means, like, the other 4 vital signs are your blood pressure, your body temperature, your breathing rate, and your heart rate. Those are the other 4 vital signs. And the 5th vital sign is your menstrual cycle. So if you're having pain during your period, that's your body's way of letting you know that there is a deeper issue. There's a root cause that is causing this pain to happen. And a lot of times it can be caused from inflammation that causes high estrogen levels. And it also causes something called prostaglandins. These are like hormone-like substances in our bodies. And there are 3 different types of prostaglandins. 2 of them are anti-inflammatory. 1 of them is inflammatory. But when we have inflammation in our body from, maybe an inflammatory diet, obviously dairy causes inflammation, gluten can cause inflammation, stress can cause inflammation, medication, environment, toxins, pesticides, like, we can go on and on and on about things that cause inflammation. This can cause these inflammatory prostaglandins to be increased, which is going to cause these painful periods. So it is a direct result of having too much inflammation in our body. So it sounds simple, but when you when you do things that are anti-inflammatory, it's going to increase the anti-inflammatory prostaglandins. It's going to reduce that amount of excess estrogen, and it's going to allow your period to not be painful. Now, obviously, this could also be a sign of endometriosis. So you definitely want to make sure that this is also why I talk all about painful periods, because women who have, or people who get diagnosed with endometriosis sometimes go decades and decades, literally, without being diagnosed because they just think that a painful period is normal because that's what they're told, or they go on the birth control pill for it or the IUD, like whatever it is. But it's not normal. So if you do have painful periods, I highly suggest getting some blood work done, working with somebody, getting some ultrasounds, like really making sure that you are ruling out endometriosis. Or if you do have endometriosis, you are working with someone who is not just going to throw you on medication for it, is going to actually talk to you about how to switch your diet accordingly. And this is the perfect podcast to talk about this. Whenever I work with clients who have a painful period, I recommend a plant-based diet because a plant-based diet is so anti-inflammatory and it works wonders. Like I've literally worked with clients where they could not get out of bed, like had to take really intense medications, like not just ibuprofen, like narcotics. They couldn't get out of bed because of the pain, and a plant-based diet has helped them. They could do yoga on their period now. Like, you know, it's really, really important. Obviously doing other things as well, like supplements and stuff like that. But plant-based diet is huge. So if you do have painful periods, I do highly recommend increasing the amount of plants that you are consuming, reducing your animal products as much as possible. And it is going to help your inflammation levels. So I can go on and on and on about this, but if you are experiencing painful periods, the first thing I want you to know is number one, it's not normal. It is common, but it's not normal. And number two, start looking at things that might be inflammatory that you could start switching out. So how much are you eating animal products? How can you reduce that? How can you reduce the amount of chemical exposure or toxic exposure you have in your day? Can you switch from like conventional beauty and household cleaning products to non-toxic ones? Like all these things are going to really, really be beneficial for reducing that inflammation, for reducing the amount of estrogen you have that's causing these painful periods.
And today I have a very special local guest with me named Lenore. She is the founder and animal care director of Piedmont Farm Animal Refuge. Kind of along those lines too, Lenore, there's a common question out there of the language that we use around animals. So why we choose maybe to use the term livestock versus farm animals, or even use the words like beef or bacon and not cow or pig. Could you maybe just elaborate a little bit more on that?
I think there is an intentional disconnect between us as, you know, humans and the general public, and then the animals that are eaten. And there's a lot that's done by the food industry to make sure that that disconnect is there. Because I think when we're using terms like it's a cow or it's a pig, you know, that brings to mind certain images of these animals usually being alive. And when we are able to come up with these terms that disassociate us from that image, it's much easier to, you know, engage in eating these animals and really not thinking about them as individuals. Most of us go to the store, there's something wrapped up in a package that we buy, you know, and it's ground beef or, you know, a pork loin or whatever it may be. And we're not thinking at all about who that animal was, what kind of life they had. And that's really ingrained in our society because I'm an optimistic person and I have seen through the years of work at Refuge that people are inherently connected to animals. Most people would not want animals to be treated the way that they are in the farming industry. You know, unless you have money yet or you're like a psychopath, any person who sees that is going to say, I don't want animals to be treated that way. That's horrible. But yet we're going and we're buying these products and we're supporting that. So by making those connections, which is a big part of the work that we do here at the Refuge, we're trying to eat away at that disconnect and talk about these issues, not only abstractly, you know, this is a pig or this is a cow or this is a goat, but here's the actual individual that you're meeting with your own eyes, and this is their story. And we've been, you know, I've seen a lot of people have their minds and hearts open through that experience.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I think it'd be really hard not to have your mind and your heart opened, you know, when you're really immersed in it and when you come visit your refuge, especially after hearing all the stories and everything. We're talking about the relationship of the nervous system with the gut microbiome. So I have Nicole on the show. She is now an integrative and functional nutritionist trained dietitian, helping people who are experiencing food intolerances using brain-based nutrition to expand what they can eat.
So to understand food intolerance, you start by understanding that the brain has both conscious thoughts and unconscious thoughts. So conscious thoughts, you decide to clean up your house because it's messy. You're aware that that is a thought that you're having, and then you make a decision and you act on it. Then there's unconscious thoughts, which consist of the processes in the brain that occur automatically and affect outward expression of internal emotions. That's really key. So this unconscious system has billions of nerves linked together like mini little highways throughout your body. And when we do something, let's say we're doing a squat thrust. I'm sure you know that is like the farthest thing from an easy thing to pick up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a squat thrust, if you're listening, is this movement where you pick up a bar and you do a squat, and then you stand up and you thrust it over your head. So the first time you do that, you're very consciously thinking, okay, what do I do with my feet? What do I do with my hands, my eyes, my core? And you're consciously thinking about all these movements as you put them together. And then you make it happen. So then when you do it repeatedly, you create this well-worn pathway of these nerves that fire together very easily. And the action becomes automatic and unconscious. So you can do this movement now without thinking about your feet, your hands, you're just doing it. And so that's when it becomes unconscious. And so this is true for anything that becomes second nature. You've repeated it a bunch of times and you can almost just do it. Like if you drive to work, let's say, for the 1,000th time, and you just kind of like show up there and you're like, whoa, I don't even remember this drive.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's because it's become an unconscious pathway. So you can just get there. So that system of unconsciously wired nerves in the body, it dictates our movements and our thoughts. And this is where behavioral conditioning comes into play. And it explains our food intolerances a little bit better. So nerd caps on.
Let's do it.
Nerd hats, put them on. Okay. So if you've heard of Pavlov, he's talked about a lot in these, I don't know if you've ever taken psychology in high school or in college. They talk about Pavlov, and he was known for studying these dogs. And so he would ring a bell, him and his researchers would ring a bell, and then they would feed the dogs. And eventually the dogs associated the bell ringing with food, and so they would salivate whenever the bell rang, even if food didn't show up. So those dogs had associated this cue with an outcome, which was eating. So the bell with eating. And so this was a landmark study because we learned that the body would do things like salivating, even if it wasn't based on current reality. It's based on memory. So boom, then we link memories and the body, right? With body systems. So then we can look at fear conditioning. And this is what really links in the unconscious food intolerance. So if we have an unpleasant experience with food, such as pain from a past food experience, let's say you ate a food and it made you feel sick. A lot of people will know this to be true if they ever threw up while eating food and they don't want to touch that food again. That's definitely one I see a lot. So that could be one. Another one could be if you were on an intense restrictive diet in the past and it told you that XYZ food was the worst food you could possibly eat. That also is an unpleasant experience with food. Another could be just an intense fear from someone you trust telling you that a food is the worst food you could possibly have. So this could be someone in your life or someone on media. But those things can create food being associated with a danger cue. And so that unconscious automatic reaction when eating can be created. So it could be any kind of symptom. It could be bloat, constipation, which we talked about. It could be loose stools, brain fog. I've seen vertigo. I've seen arthritic-like symptoms. Really what you'd be looking for is that it happens after eating. Could be minutes, could be a few hours, but that's what you're looking for. And so with fear conditioning, just like the dogs who heard the bell and they had that unconscious reaction to salivate, food becomes that bell, and the unconscious reaction is that symptom. And what makes the difference, why some people get it and why some people don't, is being in this heightened stress state, what would be called like a hypervigilance state. So the brain is in this state where it's looking for threats. And so it's a lot more common to be in this state now. Our body's really good at looking for threats, dealing with threats in a short-term way, but long-term, this is one of those things that can happen, is the body is just like looking for threats, remembering those threats.
Wow.
So I guess I would love to say a disclaimer though.
Please, yeah.
Knowing this. So I want to be clear that unconscious food intolerance is related to fear conditioning, but it is not conscious thought. This is, so you can't think positive thoughts your way out of it, because it is an unconscious level of thinking. So instead, we work on old food beliefs and create safety with food until safety with food becomes the new norm.
So I'm talking with Kathleen today. She's another registered dietitian, but she specializes in plant-based eating for endurance athletes. So what are some practical tips for endurance athletes, since that's your area of expertise, that endurance athletes can use to fuel and nourish their body with plant-based eating? What are maybe some common tips that you recommend?
Yeah, so the first thing is just remembering that you can't go to a plant-based diet and just eat vegetables.
It's true.
You've got to include a lot of those nutrient-dense, calorically dense foods. So really the calorically dense. So working with them on that, making sure that they're including those. I think some easy practical tips are just making sure that you're mixing and matching your foods. And this can really help to make sure that you're getting all of your macronutrients, so the carbohydrates, the protein, and the fats. It can also help get a variety of nutrients in, right? So you're not getting the same nutrients over and over. I also like to encourage them to think about like layering their foods. So for example, if an athlete is eating oatmeal in the morning, well, what are you putting on your oatmeal? Are you cooking it with a plant-based milk, or are you using water? Are you adding seeds like chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds? Are you adding nuts? Are you adding nut butter? Are you adding fruit? So again, it's really helping you get that calorie level up. You're getting your protein, and then you're getting a variety of nutrients as well. And then I feel like athletes, a lot that I've spoken with anyway, they really pride themselves on eating the same things over and over. And I want to discourage that to a certain degree and really encourage athletes, to nourish well. You want to be including variety. So just, including, it doesn't have to be every day. You don't have to eat something different every day, but just mixing it up, week to week, or, just making a conscious effort of that. So eating by season can be really helpful in getting different, vegetables and fruits in. And we know that, when you have variety, you're not only getting different variety of nutrients, that's really important, that supports the athlete body, but we know that it's really important for good gut health too. And when we have good gut health, we have good overall health and longevity. So that's really important, because I know these endurance athletes want to be doing this into their 80s and 90s.
Yes. because there's so much misinformation out there when it comes to soy. And so who better to talk about it than Dr. Matthew Nagra, who is a naturopathic doctor devoted to bringing the most up-to-date, evidence-based nutrition information to his patients at his clinic in Vancouver and also on social media, which I'm so thankful for. You know, there's this kind of question of like, well, does soy have estrogen in it? I think there's a lot of misconception out there of like, where's the fear coming from and the misinformation coming from? So I guess, could you just clear that up? Like, does soy have estrogen?
Yeah. So soy, like I said, it is just a bean. It actually does have some unique properties though. And one of those properties is the concentration of what are called phytoestrogens. That's one word for it. It's, I almost wish it was a different name just because people get so confused by it. I mean, you can call them isoflavones, or you can break them down into the individual types of isoflavones, which are just flavonoids. They're compounds that are in a lot of foods. There's this idea that because it has a similar structure to estrogens, that it's going to cause an estrogenic response in our body. And they do actually bind to some of the same receptors in our body that estrogen does, but they don't act the same way. So we have estrogen receptors, we have different types of estrogen receptors. And when these isoflavones bind to them, they actually bind much weaker and have much less of an effect on them compared to our own estrogen, the estrogen that our bodies produce. So strength-wise, you're looking at about 1/100th to 1/1000th of strength. So they're very weak in that sense. Now, what's interesting is because they prefer to bind to certain receptors, specifically estrogen receptor beta is what it's called. I typically call them beta receptors. It's just a little easier. Those receptors can have anti-estrogenic effects in breast tissue, which is a good thing. Too much estrogen in breast tissue can promote breast cancer. So having an anti-estrogenic effect can actually reduce risk of breast cancer. And I'm sure we'll get to that in a little bit. But then having, say, pro-estrogenic response in bone tissue, where you want estrogen, right? That actually helps maintain bone mineral density, which is really important, especially for women as they age. So it just doesn't act the same way. And a lot of the concerns just come from that name, the name of the phytoestrogen. And in part from, studies on rodents where they feed them just absurd amounts of these isolated phytoestrogens, and they might have, negative effects from that. Or there are a couple case studies of some men who are consuming off the top of my head, I think it was somewhere in the ballpark of like 12 to 20 servings of soy a day, and potentially ran into issues with that. But we also have, multiple meta-analyses now looking at either men or women consuming varying amounts of soy, where, these are randomized controlled trials. So people are fed either, soy products or something else for comparison. And you actually don't see a significant impact on, say, testosterone or estrogen levels in either men or women. So we have actually really solid research suggesting that no, it doesn't have this crazy impact on your sex hormone levels, while actually, a lot of those concerns coming from very, very, very low quality research.
Today, I have back with me on the podcast one of my favorite dietitians, Lucy Call. She is an anti-diet dietitian and EFT tapping practitioner, helping kings, queens, and everyone in between heal their relationship with food and body through intuitive eating, EFT tapping, and proactive self-care. I know I've been watching your journey on social media, and I know you're getting more and more into EFT and tapping. So I'm really curious for you to introduce that to our listeners. And I'm honestly just really curious to learn more about it. So I guess let's start there, and maybe you can explain to us what EFT tapping is and like what it does and how it works, all that great stuff.
So EFT tapping is called emotional freedom technique. And it's called tapping because it looks like you're just tapping on like different parts of your body. That's basically it. So, but what I like to say is like very, very simply, it's a stress relief technique. And so it's very easy. It's very like accessible, and it's very, very adaptable to like any emotional distress that you could have, which obviously there's like, it's very broad. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use it, but it's basically, it was adapted from acupuncture. So if anybody knows the concept of acupuncture, it's basically the idea that we have they're called meridians, but they're basically energy centers in our body. And when you activate them, they have different purposes, but when you activate them with tapping, it teaches your body to relax. And so when they actually do studies with this, there's actually a lot of like clinical studies. So it was adapted from acupuncture, and then there was something called thought field therapy, and now it's transformed into EFT, emotional freedom technique. But basically it's the pairing of stimulating different like acupressure points on your body while speaking, or really just like activating different like emotions within yourself. So if I were to say, even though I'm afraid of what my family might think about me, I love and accept myself anyway. So you're acknowledging any feeling that you're having while tapping on the points. So you teach your body that it's okay and safe to relax, like in the face of this challenge.
Ooh,
does that make sense?
It does. I feel like that's very timely for, the holiday season. I mean, there are seasons throughout life and throughout even just the calendar year that are stressful. But I feel like with the holidays coming up, this could be especially helpful. Because one thing I heard is it's great for stress relief and it's really accessible. Two things which for me are wonderful. And I know for you listening, you're probably like, yes, that's what I need. Accessible, and we're all stressed. So perfect.
People ask me all the time, it's like, well, how do you use it? How long do you have to tap? And really, I wish I had a better answer, but it's like any dietitian answer is like, it depends.
Yeah.
So if it's something like a really like acute, I don't know, that sounds so clinical, but like if it's like a one-off instance where it's like you're going to like the dentist office, like they actually have done studies about tapping and going to the dentist, and like you only need like 10 minutes of tapping to see significant reductions in stress. Whereas if you have a longstanding chronic challenge like depression, anxiety, it actually takes more like 6 to 8 hours of tapping to see like significant reductions in those different chronic illnesses.
Is that 6 to 8 hours like all together, or is it over time?
No,
Okay.
over time. So that's a great question. So what I do, like when I tap with people, we'll do like, you could do like a 10-minute session, but I will end up tapping with people for like 30 to 45 minutes. And it's not tapping the entire time. You actually like, I do like talk to people and say, okay, well, what makes you stressed? Where do you feel it in your body? Because what tapping does is we can transform, we can clear, we can do a lot of different things with either a thought, an emotion, or a physical sensation.
Today, we're talking all about plant-based pregnancy. So I have Krista, who I interview. She is a registered dietitian nutritionist who helps women and families eat to meet their nutrition needs. She focuses on prevention and wellness while also treating specific conditions. So we talked a lot about micros, which I think is fantastic. What about macros? So you touched on calories, protein, fat, carbohydrates. Is there, I think a concern with a lot of people is like, well, am I going to get enough protein on a plant-based diet and also, go through full term? What do you kind of say to that?
A lot of the plant-based pregnant women I work with are worried that they can't like meet the protein needs because they increase by so much. They increase by like 50%. So protein is usually not a problem when eating plant-based prior to pregnancy, even if you're 100% plant-based. But the increased needs during pregnancy can be really challenging for a lot of women. So some tips that what we usually talk about are having a smoothie every day, like not necessarily a protein shake, but like making your own smoothie, adding tofu, adding peanut butter, adding frozen edamame. And then like swaps also are really helpful. So switching to extra firm tofu instead of like the softer tofu, and also tempeh, those will be higher, using higher protein breads and pastas. So those made from chickpea or lentil flour, and then making your own too, like making things with these flours really can help you like make a little high protein bread or a crepe or a pancake. And protein powders also can be safe in pregnancy. You just want to look for one that like, again, doesn't have those herbs or doesn't have the green powder or adaptogens or artificial sweeteners. And so, we really go through like which ones are safe and not. It's not just like anyone goes kind of thing.
Krista, I don't think I knew this. So protein needs during pregnancy increase by 50% is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So one of the first things we start doing is like, if you were not doing this already, planning your perfect plant-based meal, right? Start to build each meal around plant protein. Okay. So I have this like my little plant-based pregnancy plate. And what I teach is protein, fiber, and fat, right? So the protein, we want to make sure it's your high quality plant protein every meal and snack, right? So that means your beans, lentils, legumes, right? Soy or wheat gluten, right? Peanut butter and hemp seeds, we can also like count a little bit, and they can be considered that primary source of protein, but the rest of the stuff, the nuts, the seeds, whole grains, veggies, that all contain some protein. They will all contribute to your daily intake. I like to start seeing those actually just as a bonus, right? So I categorize them as either the fat or the fiber. So then it's always your main protein, and then fiber and fat choices also that are contributing to the protein as well.
Okay. Yeah. And I feel like the way you approach it too, it feels really attainable because you're just making little swaps to make things a little bit higher in protein. Like you said, the pasta or the breads, or even switching out your tofu and just kind of paying attention to those things versus like overhauling your entire diet and making it feel maybe really overwhelming.
Yes, it can be overwhelming, and I have clients that are like, I'm just way off here. Like I'm way low. I have not paid attention to how much protein I would think I would need. And, that's where the little tips come in. The swaps. Oh, well, why don't we make a dressing from hemp seeds, right? Instead of just dumping on an extra 5 ounces of tofu on your salad, like let's do stuff you're already doing and just boost it.
To give you a little bit of background on Dr. Robin Chutkan. So she is, like I said, an integrative gastroenterologist. She's on faculty at Georgetown Hospital. She's also the founder of the Digestive Center for Wellness and the author of 4 digestive wellness books. One is Gut Bliss, The Microbiome Solution, The Bloat Cure, and a book that is coming out on November 1st, 2022, The Antiviral Gut. And I know food nutrition plays a big role in feeding your gut and growing that really good bacteria. What are some other ways maybe we can strengthen our immunity or our gut microbiome in addition to food?
I'm glad you asked about that, Ashley, because sleep and stress are 2 big ones now, and I've seen them personally in my own life earlier this year. If we look at sleep, and I went really deep on sleep. In fact, the first version of the book, I think the sleep chapter was 61 pages. And my editors were like, you are not Matthew Walker. He wrote that book, Why We Sleep. This is something else. So we appreciate that you're, a gastroenterologist who's really, keen on sleep, but we need to condense this chapter. And the reason why is that there was just so much stuff. And so, here's a simple one. Melatonin, the sleep hormone, is made from serotonin, the feel-good hormone that's made in the gut by gut bacteria. So you can start to see, okay, your gut microbiome is off, is messed up. Your serotonin levels are off and messed up. Your melatonin levels are going to be off and messed up. So again, it's all connected, but the data on sleep is really fascinating in terms of increasing risk for viral illness in particular, illness in general and bacterial illness, but viral illness and for vaccines. So for example, there's data that shows if you're sleep deprived in the 2 days prior to a vaccine, a flu vaccine or COVID vaccine, it can be 50% less effective, Ashley, which is crazy, right?
Yes.
So crazy.
That's
50% less effective. And why? Because sleep is essential for rebooting your immune system. So, there's a study that shows, I want to make sure I get these statistics right, a study that shows that people who are sleep deprived can be as much as 76% higher risk of coming down with a viral infection after exposure. And that for every 1 hour of additional sleep you get, there's a 12% drop in your risk of getting an infection. So what I want to remind people is that exposure to these viruses is almost inevitable. We're seeing, right, with COVID. I mean, presidents get it. But what we do see is that outcome, even though exposure may be inevitable, outcome varies dramatically. And this is, again, where host health matters. So virulence of the pathogen matters too, right? There are different strains, and different strains could be more infectious, less infectious, cause more complications. But ultimately, what is going to determine your outcome to a great degree is what's going on internally with your internal soil, what's going on with your gut microbiome, your gut lining, your immune system, and other things too, stomach acid, mucus, fever. There's so much stuff there. So sleep is a big one that can really affect things. And stress is another one. And so I'm not talking about acute stress, because acute stress can actually prime our immune system to, be on alert for danger. but chronic stress really affects our immune system, and it really sabotages that immune system and decreases our ability to fight illness. So there's a famous study of 276 adults where they expose them to a virus that causes a cold, a coronavirus, but not this one, not SARS-CoV-2. And they found that those who reported chronic stress were twice as likely to become infected when they were exposed, and were much more likely to get sicker and to miss more days of work after they got ill. We see it in college students. I mean, I see it all the time in my college student patients where during finals, where they're sleep deprived and stressed, that's when they flare up. Their Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, or that's when they get sick. Their mono reactivates, because it's not just acute infection, it's also latent viruses like Epstein-Barr virus that causes mono, or herpes virus like shingles. So you can be, simmering along, the virus is latent, and then you're really stressed and or sleep deprived, and now your immune system that normally would be keeping it in check now is not able to do that, and all of a sudden you have a recurrence. So you have shingles, or you have mono, or you have an outbreak of herpes. So again, not an accident for most of us.
Yeah. I feel like that's really helpful because a lot of doctors or people just talk about how important sleep is, how important stress is. And it's like, why? And I feel like you just gave us the why. So that was really helpful, especially when it comes to immunity. Until next time, keep thriving.